To understand how the chapter 5 of part 1 begins, we have to remember how chapter 4 ends. And we will see that Walter Hartwright and the woman in white, both of them have taken a cab, but they haven't traveled very far when this taxi pulls up nearby and drops off a passenger. Walter Hartwright makes sure that the taxi or cab is going the right way and the driver is not drunk. And the woman in white, and the woman in white clothes, actually, the woman in white means the woman in white clothes, climbs eagerly into the carriage. The cab drives away and Walter continues his walk home. 10 minutes later, a carriage passes him. 10 minutes later, a carriage passes him, and the driver leans out to address a policeman on the other side of the road. Walter hears the man in the carriage ask the policeman if he has seen a woman in white, clothes. The policeman asks why he is looking for this woman, and the man in the carriage replies that she has escaped from his asylum. So we see that Walter is protective towards the woman and recognizes that she may be threatened by the male cab driver if he is drunk or seeks to take advantage of her. The shocking revelation that the woman has escaped from an asylum enforces, or rather reinforces, the atmosphere of tension and anxiety which is building around Walter Hartwright's connection with the Limeridge house. It also contributes to the mystery of the novel, as the reader is left wondering who is this woman and what is she and what she will do next now that Walter has helped her escape. So chapter 5 of part 1, in chapter 5 we see that Walter is horrified to hear that the woman in white clothes has escaped from an asylum. He thinks back over their conversation and admits that although she seemed on edge and unsettled, she gave him no reason to believe she was insane. He agonizes over her actions and wonders whether he has helped an innocent victim who has been unfairly locked up, or whether he has helped a dangerous criminal to escape. He wonders what has become of the woman and is quite relieved to depart from London for Limeridge the next afternoon. So Walter takes the train towards Cumberland and arrives after dark. A carriage is waiting at the station to take him to Limeridge House, and the servant seems surely but respectable. Walter dines alone when he arrives at the manor and feels strange eating and going to bed in an unknown house where the inhabitants are complete strangers to him. So Walter feels a sense of mystery which is also growing with the readers. And dining alone in the house with total strangers is he's totally curious about how his time at Limeridge will unfold. And in chapter 6 we see that Walter wakes up in Limeridge House and goes down to breakfast. On entering the dining room, he sees a woman with a beautiful figure standing with her back to him in the parlor. When the woman turns around, however, Walter is shocked to discover that she is ugly and that her face does not match her graceful figure. The woman introduces herself in a frank, confident manner and teasingly adds that Walter will have to put up with just her at breakfast, as her sisters have a headache and her uncle Mr. Fairley never comes down. She tells Walter that she is one of his students and that her name is Marianne Halcombe. And Walter likes Marianne's friendly and cheerful manner and listens to her as she tells him about herself and the other inhabitants of Limeridge House. She tells him that she and her half-sister Laura Fairley are complete opposites. Marianne is the daughter of a poor man, while Laura is heir to a fortune, but that they are extremely fond of each other. Marianne explains that it is Laura who is interested in drawing and that she herself is very bad at art and music, but that she can play parlor games. She hopes that between them they will be able to keep Walter suitably entertained and that he will not long for adventures. This reference to adventures reminds Walter of his meeting with the woman in white clothes. He tells Marianne about the experience, and Marianne is shocked to hear that the woman mentioned her mother, that is Mrs. Fairley, since she has no idea who the woman in white could be. Walter explains that the woman in white claimed to have been at school in Limerick, although not a native of the countryside nearby, and that she knew Laura Fairley during her time there. Marianne is completely baffled by the mystery, but does ascertain that her mother, Mrs. Fairley, ran a school for a while in the village of Limerick after her second marriage to Laura's father. After the second marriage of to Laura's father, Marianne feels that Walter has done the right thing by helping the woman in white clothes to escape, as she is sure that she is a poor persecuted woman rather than a criminal. She tells Walter that she is fascinated by the mystery and that she has a stash of her mother's letters which she will examine for clues. A note arrives from Mr. Fairley inviting Walter to visit him, and Walter leaves Marianne to her breakfast. So here we see that Marianne's interest in adventures and her fascination with the story Walter tells her about the woman in white demonstrate her adventurous and inquiring spirit. These are traits considered masculine in the 19th century. Marianne implies that the woman in white may have told the truth about her relationship with Mrs. Fairley, as Mrs. Fairley ran a school at Limerick, which the woman may have attended as a young girl. A servant leads Walter upstairs to Mr. Fairley's rooms. He is led into the room very quietly. This happens in chapter 7. A servant leads Walter upstairs, and he is led into the room very quietly and discovers on entering that the room is very dim with curtains over the windows and that is stuffed with statues and artworks. Mr. Fairley is a languid, effeminate man who suffers from nerves. He tells Walter that he has grown up abroad and that it has given him a taste for art beyond the usual barbarity. Mr. Fairley commissions Walter to examine a collection of English watercolors that he owns and decide their value, but continually interrupts Walter when he tries to give his opinion on them. So Mr. Fairley then dismisses him, and Walter, feeling offended by Mr. Fairley's haughty and aristocratic manner, decides not to visit his employer again unless he is explicitly asked for. In chapter 8, we see that Walter Hartright goes down for lunch with Marianne and meets Laura and Marianne's servant, Mrs. Vesey. After lunch, Marianne takes Walter for a walk in the grounds and tells him that although she has found no evidence yet among her mother's letters of a connection with the woman in white, she intends to keep looking. They reach a pretty summer house and find Laura there, looking through her sketchbook. And Walter tells the reader that there is a watercolor on his desk where he sits writing, a portrait of Laura that he finished soon after their meeting. And he thinks how much lovelier Laura is in person than in this dull mechanical sketch. On meeting her for the first time in the summer house, Walter is struck by her beauty because she is the epitome of magnanimity for him rather. At the same time, however, he notices something troubling and familiar about her face. Laura is too shy to show Walter her drawings, which she feels are very rough. Marian teases them both and suggests that they take a drive in the carriage and let Walter compare their work to the scenery around Limerick House. Looking back over this carriage while he writes, Walter notes that he remembers every detail of his conversation with Laura on this trip. When they both arrive back at the house, Walter goes up to his sitting room and, while alone, begins to feel uncomfortable about his role at Limerick as a teacher, as he feels he has been too unguarded with Laura and Marian and starts to wonder about the strange, familiar quality which he sees in Laura's face. He retires to the drawing room with the ladies after dinner and finds Laura dressed in white clothes. So Laura plays the piano for the group while Mrs. Vesey dozes in the corner and Marian continues to search through Mrs. Fairley's letters for mentions of the woman in white. It is a moonlit night and they have the drawing room doors open onto the veranda outside. Walter and Laura move out onto the veranda to look at the garden in the moonlight, but have only been outside a few minutes when Marian calls Walter back inside. Walter leaves Laura on the veranda and Marian calls him over to her seat beside the fire. Laura continues to walk beside and forth on the terrace before the open doors, singing softly to herself. Marian reads Walter a letter from her mother to Mr. Philip Fairley, Laura's daughter. The letter tells Mr. Fairley about a new pupil at her school. The daughter of the woman is called Mrs. Catherick. The girl's name is Annie Catherick, and Mrs. Fairley writes that she has developed a strong bond with the girl, who is a little strange but very affectionate, and who has a habit of sticking very stubbornly to certain ideas once they have entered her mind. Mrs. Fairley's letter explained that she gave Annie several sets of white clothes, feeling that the little girls looked best in white, and that when she heard this, Annie vowed always to dress in white. Marian asks Walter if this young girl could be the woman who he met on the road. Walter believes it is possible, and Marian reads the rest of the letter, which notes the inexplicable physical similarity between Annie and Mrs. Fairley's own daughter, Laura. As Marian reads these words, Laura comes to the drawing room door of the drawing room, and Walter leaps up from his chair, startled suddenly by the realization that Laura in fact reminds him of the woman in white. Walter begs Marian to call Laura in out of the moonlight to relieve its eerie effect. He feels that this similarity between Laura and the woman in white is a bad omen for Laura's future. Marian whispers to Walter that they should keep this discovery from Laura, and they change the subject as Laura returns to the room.